The Mafia boss found a wounded single mom in the storm. No one will touch you again. Before we dive into the story, tell me where in the world you're watching from. And if this story steals your heart, please hit subscribe. The tires hissed over wet asphalt, a rhythmic counterpoint to the violent drumming of rain against the armored sedan. Dimitri Karas stared into the liquid darkness, his mind leagues away from the treacherous country road. The storm was an inconvenience, but the betrayal he had confirmed that evening was a disease. A rot within his organization, personified by a lieutenant who had grown too greedy. Dimitri's world was one of brutal order, and he was returning to his fortress to finalize the excision. His gray eyes, cold as the night air, scanned the road, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. He drove himself only when he needed the silence to think, and tonight the silence was filled with the calculations of consequence. A flicker of movement at the edge of his high beams, something pale and broken, snagged his attention. He slowed, his instincts screaming. It was not a deer. It was a heap of soaked rags that had the distinct, terrible shape of a human body. He stopped the car, the engine a low thrum against the chaos of the wind. His hand moved to the weapon beneath his jacket, a reflex older than his tailored suit. This was his territory, the desolate stretch of land that served as a buffer between his estate and the city he controlled. Nothing happened here without his knowledge. He stepped out into the deluge, the icy rain plastering his dark, slicked-back hair to his scalp in seconds. His expensive leather shoes crunched on the gravel shoulder. The figure was a woman. She was lying face down in the mud, her thin clothing torn and clinging to a petite frame. He reached down, his touch impersonal, and rolled her over. He was prepared for death, for the grotesque, but not for the flicker of defiance in the brown eyes that briefly met his. Her face was a ruin of new and old bruises, her lips split and bleeding. She was young, fragile, and looked like a sparrow caught by a hawk. She tried to speak, a wet gasp before her eyes rolled back. A deep, unfamiliar annoyance stirred in Dimitri. This was a problem, a complication he had no time for. His first thought was to call his men, to have Stefan, his head of security, clean this up. She was a liability, a witness to what? Her own assault, or just a victim of the storm? He looked down the empty road, no other cars, no lights. Whoever had done this was long gone. He studied her face, the chiseled line of his own jaw tightening. A faint scar, a silvery track from his temple, seemed to pulse in the cold. He had seen violence his entire life. It was the language of his business. But this was sloppy. It was chaos. It was the kind of messy, personal brutality he despised. He saw the marks on her throat, strangulation. She was a fighter. That one look in her eyes, that brief spark of no, had registered. Against every rule of self-preservation that had kept him alive and in power, Dimitri bent down. He slid one arm beneath her knees and the other behind her back, lifting her. She weighed almost nothing, a cold, wet bundle of broken bones and terror. He carried her to the sedan, ignoring the mud and blood smearing the front of his black coat. He placed her in the passenger seat, turned the heat on full blast, and drove the remaining mile to his gates, his mind no longer on his traitorous lieutenant, but on the dying woman beside him. The iron gates of the Karas estate slid open silently, revealing the sprawling mansion. It was a fortress of modern architecture, all glass and dark stone, perched on a hill overlooking the rain-soaked valley and the distant, glittering lights of the city. He pulled up to the main entrance, leaving the car running, and lifted her again. He strode into the cavernous marble foyer, shouting a name. "Petrova!" His voice echoed in the sterile expanse. The housekeeper, a stern woman in her 60s with her hair in a severe bun, emerged from a hallway, her face impassive until she saw the bundle in his arms. Her eyes widened, a fractional but significant breach of her composure. "Sir," she asked, her voice tight. "My study, blankets, brandy, and call Elias. Tell him it is urgent," Dimitri commanded, already moving. He laid the woman down on the rich leather couch in his study, a room walled with books he never read and a fireplace that was currently dark. He stripped off his soaked coat, tossing it to the floor, and covered her with an expensive cashmere throw Mrs. Petrova produced. The woman, whose name he still did not know, was shivering violently, her breathing shallow and ragged. Mrs. Petrova returned with the brandy and a first aid kit, her movements brisk. "She is barely breathing, Mr. Karas," the housekeeper observed, her lips thin. "Elias is on his way." Dimitri stood by the massive, floor-to-ceiling window, watching the lightning crackle over his city. This was an intrusion. This woman, this piece of tragic flotsam, had breached his walls. He felt a sharp, possessive anger at the unseen man who had done this, who had dared to discard his trash on Dimitri's doorstep. It was a territorial violation. Dr. Elias arrived within 10 minutes, a quiet man with sad eyes who had served the Kara's family for 20 years, treating bullet wounds and patching up men without asking questions. He carried a black medical bag and immediately set to work, cutting away the woman's torn, muddy clothes with a practiced efficiency. Mrs. Petrova discreetly covered the woman's exposed form with another blanket as Elias worked. Dimitri remained by the window, his back to the room, a silent, menacing sentinel. He heard Elias murmur clinical observations. Multiple contusions, possible cracked ribs, dehydration, hypothermia. That mark on her lip is infected. She has been unwell for some time. He heard the clink of glass vials, the snap of a syringe. Elias was giving her antibiotics, fluids, something for the pain. Dimitri did not turn around until the doctor spoke to him directly. She is stable for now. She needs rest. Whoever did this. They were thorough. Dimitri finally turned. His gray eyes were flat, devoid of emotion. She will stay here in the east wing. Put her in the blue room. Mrs. Petrova, see to it. She is not to be disturbed, but she is not to leave. The order was absolute. Mrs. Petrova nodded, understanding the distinction perfectly. A guest who could not leave was a prisoner. As Elias and Mrs. Petrova began to organize her transfer, the woman on the couch stirred. Her eyes, the color of warm whiskey, flickered open. They were wild with panic, unfocused, seeing ghosts in the opulent room. She tried to sit up, a strangled cry catching in her throat. "No, please, Leo," she whispered, her voice raw. She grabbed at the air, her hand finding the sleeve of Dimitri's suit jacket as he stood near the couch. Her grip was surprisingly strong. "He has him." He took Leo. "My son." Her eyes lost their focus, and she collapsed back into the pillows, succumbing to the sedative Elias had administered. Dimitri stared at his sleeve where her hand had been. A wet, muddy print, "My son." The complication had just grown exponentially. This was not just a woman, she was a mother. The cold, precise anger in his chest solidified, turning into something heavier. He looked at Elias. "Keep her alive." Rachel awoke to the unfamiliar sensation of silk against her skin. Her body ached with a deep, resonant pain, a symphony of bruises and cracked ribs. For a moment she was adrift, unsure where she was. The last thing she remembered was the rain, the freezing mud, and Mark's face, contorted in rage as his hands closed around her throat. She remembered the headlights, a dark figure. Had he come back for her? Panic seized her, cold and sharp, clearing the fog from her mind. She tried to sit up, but a jolt of agony from her side sent her gasping back against a mountain of pillows. Her eyes flew open, taking in the room. It was vast, larger than her entire apartment. The walls were a soft, calming blue, the furniture a heavy, dark wood. A fireplace, unlit, dominated one wall. Opposite the bed, floor-to-ceiling windows were covered by thick cream-colored drapes. She was clean. She was wearing a silk pajama set that felt absurdly decadent on her battered body. Her chestnut hair was dry, brushed. She was in a cage. A beautiful, luxurious cage, but a cage nonetheless. She pushed herself up, ignoring the pain, her feet hitting a thick Persian rug. She was weak, dizzy, but adrenaline was a powerful fuel. She stumbled to the windows and pulled the drapes aside. Her breath caught. She was high up, looking down on a sprawling, meticulously manicured garden, slick with rain. Beyond that, a valley, and in the far distance, the unmistakable skyline of the city. But she was far from it. The grounds were surrounded by a formidable wall of dark stone. There was no escape. "I would not recommend walking around. The doctor said you need rest." The voice came from the doorway, low and smooth, with a distinct Greek accent. It vibrated with power. Rachel spun around, her heart leaping into her throat. The man from the storm. He was taller than she remembered, broader. He filled the doorway, dressed not in a soaked coat, but in an immaculate dark gray suit that probably cost more than she made in a year. His dark hair was perfectly styled, slicked back from a face that was all sharp angles and chiseled planes. His gray eyes, cold and assessing, swept over her, missing nothing. The faint scar on his jaw seemed to define the dangerous edge of his features. "Who are you?" Rachel demanded, her voice a harsh croak. She backed away until she hit the cold glass of the window. "Where am I? What do you want?" He was Dimitri Kara's, and he did not owe this stray anything, least of all an explanation. But her defiance, the way she stood tall despite her obvious terror and pain, intrigued him. He stepped into the room but kept his distance, not wanting to frighten her into an act of desperation. "My name is Dmitri Karas. This is my home. You were on my road. You were dying." He let the facts settle in the air between them. "I brought you here. My doctor tended to your wounds." Rachel's mind raced. Karas. The name was vaguely familiar, whispered in connection with organized crime with the port, with half the politicians in the city. She was in a mobster's house. She had traded one monster for another. "Thank you for the help," she said, her words stiff. "I need to leave. I need to go." "You are in no condition to go anywhere," Dmitri stated flatly. "And even if you were, you are not leaving." "You cannot keep me here," she retorted, though the words sounded hollow even to her. "I can and I will," he replied, his voice dropping. "You were found on my property half dead. That makes you my business. I do not like complications, and you, little one, are a very significant complication." He moved to a chair near the fireplace and sat, crossing one leg over the other, the picture of casual command. "So, you will tell me who you are. You will tell me who did this to you. You will tell me." He paused, his gray eyes locking onto hers. "Who is Leo?" Her blood ran cold. She had spoken, she had told him, her hand flew to her mouth. "No." "Yes," Dmitri said, his patience wearing thin. "You were quite distressed. He has my son, he took Leo." "So we will start there. Who has your son?" Rachel stared at him, her mind a battlefield of fear and desperation. This man was dangerous. He was a criminal. Telling him the truth could put Leo in even more danger. But what choice did she have? She was trapped. She had no money, no power, no allies. Mark had made sure of that. The silence stretched, filled only by the ticking of a heavy clock on the mantel. Dmitri watched her, his expression unreadable. He was waiting. He knew she would break. "His name is Mark," Rachel finally whispered, the name tasting like ash on her tongue. "Mark Jensen." She saw no flicker of recognition in Dmitri's eyes. "And who is he, your husband?" "My ex-boyfriend," she said, shame and anger warring within her. He is a police officer." This got a reaction. Dmitri did not move, but a stillness settled over him, a sharpening of his focus that was more terrifying than a shout. A cop. Of all the messy, problematic things she could have been, she was tied to a cop. "A police officer did this to you," Dmitri said, his voice flat, clarifying a fact, not asking a question. Rachel nodded, the tears she had refused to shed finally spilling over, hot and angry. He was good at first, charismatic, everyone loved him. But then, he changed. The control, the jealousy. When I tried to leave, he used his badge. He told everyone I was unstable. He threatened my friends, my job, until I had no one left. He promised he would take Leo, that he would use his position to have me declared an unfit mother. She was packing now, the story tumbling out of her, the dam of her silence broken. "I finally got the courage. I saved some money. I had a friend, someone he did not know about, waiting for me in the next state. I was going to get Leo and run, but Mark found out. He found my stash of money. He took Leo from daycare early. He called me, told me to meet him on that road if I ever wanted to see my son again." She was sobbing now, deep, racking sobs of failure and grief. "I was so stupid. I thought I could reason with him, but he just wanted to punish me. He beat me. He told me he was going to take Leo where I could never find him and that he was leaving me there to die. He told me to run, and when I did, he hit me with his car. Then he, she could not say it. She wrapped her arms around her own waist, holding herself together. Dmitri watched her break down, his face an impassive mask. Inside, a cold, precise engine of fury was turning over. He loathed men who used their power, their position, to terrorize those weaker than themselves. It was inefficient. It was vulgar. A cop. A bully who hid behind a uniform. "He took your son," Dmitri said, bringing her back to the present. "Yes," she choked out. "He has my little boy. Oh God, Leo. He must be so scared." Dmitri stood. The movement was sudden and Rachel flinched back. He stopped, holding up a hand, not in comfort but in command. "Stop. Crying will not help you or your son." His words were harsh, but they sliced through her hysteria. She wiped her face, her chin trembling. "You are here," he continued, walking toward her. He stopped a few feet away, an impasse overable chasm of power between them. "You are safe. As long as you are in this house, no one can touch you, not your Mark, not anyone." Rachel looked up at him, her tear-filled eyes searching his cold, gray ones. Why are you doing this?" "Because he left you on my road," Dmitri said simply, as if that explained everything. And perhaps it did. It was a matter of territory, a matter of pride. "I will look into this, Officer Mark. I will find out where he is, where your son is." "You will," she breathed, a fragile seed of hope blooming in the wasteland of her despair. But what do you want in return? Dmitri looked at her, truly looked at her, at the spirit hiding behind the bruises, at the fierce maternal love that had kept her alive. For now, he said, his voice softening almost imperceptibly, you will eat, you will rest, you will get your strength back, and you will not leave this house. You belong to my world now, Rachel, that is the arrangement. He did not wait for an answer. He turned and left the room, the heavy door clicking shut behind him, leaving Rachel alone in the gilded cage, her terrifying protector's words echoing in the silence. The days that followed passed in a haze of structured silence. Rachel's life fell into a strange, disjointed rhythm, dictated by the opulence of her prison. Mrs. Petrova, the stern housekeeper, arrived 3 times a day with trays of food, rich stews, fresh bread, hot tea, that spoke of a reluctant care. She would check Rachel's bandages with brisk, impersonal movements, her lips pursed, offering no conversation beyond curt instructions to eat or rest. Rachel did as she was told. She ate every bite, forcing the food down, willing her body to heal. She knew Dmitri was right about one thing. She was useless to Leo if she was weak. Her ribs ached, the bruises on her face turning from a violent purple to a sickly yellow, but her strength was returning. She spent her time exploring her cage. The blue room was one of many in a private wing of the mansion. The hallway outside was long and silent, adorned with dark, imposing portraits of men who looked remarkably like Dmitri, all sharp jaws and cold eyes. She discovered a library, walled in dark mahogany and filled with thousands of books, a massive fireplace at its center. She would sit there for hours, curled up in a leather armchair, a book open on her lap, though she rarely read the words. She was listening. The mansion was quiet, but it was the quiet of a predator holding its breath. She would hear the distant rumble of cars on the gravel drive, the low murmur of male voices from Dmitri's study downstairs, the occasional ring of a telephone that was answered on the first ring. She saw the guards, men in dark suits who patrolled the perimeter, their faces hard and watchful. They never acknowledged her, but she always felt their eyes. Of Dmitri, she saw almost nothing. He was a ghost in his own home, a palpable presence she felt more than saw. She would wake some mornings to the scent of his cologne in the hallway and know he had returned late. She would see him once or twice, a fleeting glimpse of his broad shoulders as he disappeared into his study, or see him standing on the terrace, a dark silhouette against the city lights, a phone pressed to his ear, his voice a low, commanding rumble. His absence was as intimidating as his presence. He was a man who ran an empire, and she was just a piece of broken cargo he had salvaged from the storm. Meanwhile, in a part of the city Rachel had never seen, in an office of smoked glass and steel, Dmitri was running his empire. The matter of his traitorous lieutenant had been handled with swift, cold finality. Now he turned his attention to the complication in his east wing. Mark Jensen, Stefan, his head of security, reported, placing a thin file on Dmitri's desk. Stefan was a wiry man with pale eyes, the only man Dmitri trusted implicitly. He's a patrol officer, decorated. Good arrest record, on the surface a model cop. Dmitri leaned back in his chair, tapping a pen on the desk, and beneath the surface, filth, Stefan said without inflection. He has a significant gambling debt owed to the Malikov family. Our rivals have owned him for 6 months. He's been using his police access to monitor patrol routes, feeding them information on our shipment movements. He was responsible for the container we lost at the port last month. Dmitri's hand stilled. The container, that had cost him dearly, not just in product but in reputation. This officer was not just an abuser, he was a thief. He was an enemy. The entire situation clarified instantly, the moral ambiguity vanishing. Rachel was no longer a charity case. She was the woman whose abuser was actively working to destroy his organization. This was no longer messy. This was simple. He got greedy, Stefan continued. We intercepted chatter. The Malikovs are unhappy. He was supposed to deliver something to them, this girlfriend, Rachel. Apparently she saw something, a ledger. He was stupid enough to bring it to their apartment. When she ran, he panicked, told the Malikovs she was a liability. So they ordered him to silence her, Dmitri concluded, the cold fury rising. They had ordered this man to kill her and dump her on his road. The disrespect was as profound as the betrayal. And the boy, Leo. With Jensen, Stefan confirmed. He's keeping the kid at his apartment, likely as insurance. He's called in sick the last 2 days. He's paranoid. He knows he failed to clean up his mess. Dmitri stood and walked to the window of his high-rise office, looking down on the city. He owned this view. Every light, every street, every shadow he considered his. Officer Mark Jensen and the Malakovs had trespassed. "Find out where the Malakovs are feeling the most pain," Dmitri ordered. "Their supply lines from the north. I want a precise strike, something that cannot be traced to us but sends a clear message. Then I want a team on Jensen's apartment. I want eyes on the boy 24 hours a day. I want to know when he sleeps, when he eats, when he breathes." "And Jensen?" Stefan asked. "He is not to be touched," Dmitri said, his voice dangerously soft. "Not yet. He's a police officer. His disappearance must be clean. It must be the logical conclusion of his own mistakes. He has debts to the Malakovs. He has a missing girlfriend. He is corrupt. He will write his own ending." Stefan nodded. "And the woman, Rachel?" Dmitri turned from the window. "She stays where she is. She is the bait, and she is the motive." That evening, Rachel was in the library, staring into the crackling fire Mrs. Petrova had lit when Dmitri found her. She started when he entered, her hand flying to her chest. He was still in his suit, his tie loosened. He looked tired, but his presence electrified the room. "You are healing," he observed, his eyes tracing the yellowing bruises on her face. "Yes," she said, her voice small. "Thank you for everything, the doctor, the food." "I did not do it for your gratitude," he said, dismissing her thanks. He walked to the fireplace, standing near her, radiating a heat that had nothing to do with the flames. She was desperate. It had been days. "My son," she whispered, unable to stop herself. "Leo, did you find him?" Dmitri looked down at her. She looked so small in the oversized armchair, a porcelain doll that had been cracked and haphazardly glued back together. He felt that strange, protective pull, the territorial instinct that she belonged to him now. "I have," he said, her entire body jolted. Is he okay? Is he alive?" "He is alive," Dmitri confirmed. "He is with Jensen at his apartment. My men are watching." Rachel sagged, a sob of pure, unadulterated relief escaping her. "Oh, thank God, thank God." She looked up at him, her brown eyes shining with unshed tears. "Please, you have to get him. Please, Mr. Karas." "Dmitri," he corrected her, the name sounding foreign in this context. "And it is not that simple. He is a police officer. A public abduction, even of his own son, will bring a world of trouble to my door. And to yours, he would use it, paint you as an unstable kidnapper working with criminals." Rachel's face fell. He was right. Mark was clever. He would twist it. "Then what?" she asked, her voice breaking. "What do we do?" Dmitri studied her, the fire that had been dampened by her fear. He needed that fire. "We wait," he said, "for the right moment. Jensen has made powerful enemies. He is a desperate man, and desperate men make mistakes." He saw the despair on her face and acted on an impulse he did not fully understand. He reached out, his hand hovering over her face, his thumb gently, almost imperceptibly, brushing the fading bruise on her cheekbone. Her skin was soft. She flinched but did not pull away. She stared at him, her breath caught. "He will be dealt with," Dmitri vowed, his voice a low growl. "His name, his debts, his associates, I know everything about him." His gray eyes burned into hers, a promise of violence that felt terrifyingly like the ultimate safety. "I gave my word, Rachel, no one will touch you again." The promise hung in the air, a binding contract. He was her protector, and she, he realized with a jolt, was his. The tension in the mansion thickened over the next 48 hours. Rachel felt it like a drop in barometric pressure, a stillness before an inevitable, violent storm. Dmitri was a coiled spring, a predator packing the confines of his own home. He was on the phone constantly, his voice a low, lethal cadence of orders given in Greek and English. Rachel stayed out of his way, retreating to the library, her anxiety for Leo a physical sickness in her stomach. She trusted Dmitri. She had no choice. But his methods were terrifying. She understood that dealing with Mark did not mean calling Child Protective Services. It meant something final, and she had to make peace with that. She had to accept that the only way to save her son was to entrust him to a monster who was, mercifully, her monster. She was staring out the window at the rain, which had returned when Dmitri found her. "It is time," he said simply. Rachel spun around. He was dressed in a dark, practical turtleneck and black trousers, his usual suit gone. He looked less like a chief executive officer and more like what he was, a gangster. What is happening?" "Jensen is moving," Dmitri said, his voice clipped and precise. "His Russian friends are displeased. They called in his marker. He is liquidating his assets, grabbing the boy and planning to run. Oh God, Rachel breathed, her hand flying to her mouth. Are they going to hurt him, Leo? They will not get the chance, Dmitri said. His coldness was absolute, reassuring. My men are in place. The Malakovs believe they are ambushing Jensen to retrieve their money. Jensen believes he is escaping. In reality, they are all walking into my parlor. He turned to leave. Wait, Rachel cried, running after him. She grabbed his arm, and the solid muscle beneath her hand startled her. He froze, looking down at her hand on his sleeve as if it were a foreign object. Let me go with you, she pleaded. He is my son, I need to be there. Dmitri's expression hardened. Absolutely not. You are a civilian, this is not a negotiation. You are the one thing that could compromise this entire operation. You will stay here. You will wait. Dmitri, please, she begged, the tears welling. I cannot just sit here while I do what is necessary, he finished for her, his voice rough. He gripped her shoulders, his hold firm but not painful. You asked me to get your son, I am getting your son. This is how it is done. You will be safe here, he will be safe. That is my only concern. He stared at her, his gray eyes searching her face, and for a second she saw something flicker beneath the ice, a protective rage that was entirely focused on her. I will bring him home, Rachel, I swear it. He released her and was gone. The hours that followed were the longest of Rachel's life. The mansion, her gilded cage, became a true prison. She paced the length of the marble foyer, from the grand staircase to the massive front doors, until Mrs. Petrova finally, almost gently, guided her to the library and brought her a cup of chamomile tea she could not drink. Every sound made her jump. Every distant rumble of thunder sounded like gunfire. She imagined 1,000 terrible scenarios, Leo caught in the crossfire, Dmitri injured, Mark escaping. She tortured herself with the possibilities, her nerves shredded raw. She did not know what she would do if Dmitri failed. She did not know what she would do if he succeeded and presented her with a bill she could not pay. The clock on the mantel ticked, each second an eternity. Midnight came and went, 1 in the morning, 2. She was curled on the leather sofa, exhausted but unable to sleep when she finally heard it, the sound of tires on the gravel driveway. Not one car, but several. Doors opened and closed. Low voices. Rachel was on her feet in an instant, running to the foyer. Her heart was pounding so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. The massive front door opened. Dmitri walked in. He was soaking wet, his dark hair disheveled, and there was a dark smudge on his jaw that looked like dirt or perhaps gunpowder. His face was a mask of grim exhaustion, but his eyes were clear. He looked at her, standing there trembling, and said nothing. Rachel's hope plummeted. Where is he? She whispered, her voice cracking. Dmitri, where is Leo? He did not answer. He just stepped aside. Behind him was Stefan, the quiet, pale-eyed security man, and in Stefan's arms, wrapped in a heavy blanket, was a small, sleeping child. Leo. His chestnut hair was plastered to his head, his face pale, but he was breathing. He was safe. Rachel's legs gave out. She crumpled to the floor, a strangled sound, half sob, half laugh, ripping from her throat. Stefan moved forward and gently, respectfully, placed the sleeping boy in her arms. Rachel clutched him, burying her face in his damp hair, inhaling the scent of him, her entire body shaking with the force of her relief. She rocked him, murmuring his name over and over, the tears she had held back for so long finally breaking free. She did not know how long she knelt there on the marble floor, clutching her son, but eventually she became aware of Dmitri. He was still standing by the door, watching them. His expression was unreadable, but the exhaustion was gone, replaced by an intense, focused stillness. He had not just brought her son back, he had brought her life back. She looked up at him, her face stained with tears, her heart overflowing with a gratitude so profound it was painful. How? She started to ask. What about Mark? Dmitri's gaze hardened. The ice was back, firmly in place. He had an unfortunate disagreement with his business partners, he said, his voice devoid of any emotion. It seems he was trying to defraud them. They met him at his apartment, the police will find him, and it was very messy. Rachel understood perfectly. Dmitri had orchestrated a war, and Mark was the collateral damage. He had not just been dealt with, he had been erased, his end written as the consequence of his own corruption. Thank you, she whispered, the words hopelessly inadequate. She meant thank you for saving my son, thank you for saving my life, thank you for giving me justice. Dmitri just nodded, a short, sharp acknowledgement. He walked over to her, bending down on one knee. He was so close she could feel the cold radiating from his wet clothes. He did not look at her. He looked at Leo, his expression uncharacteristically hesitant. He reached out a large, calloused hand, his fingers gently brushing a stray lock of hair off the boy's forehead. It was the most human, most vulnerable gesture she had ever seen from him. He then looked at her, his gray eyes locking with hers. The barrier between them, the ice and the fear, had shattered. In that moment, he was not a mafia boss. He was just the man who had brought her child home. A week passed, and the mansion began to feel less like a prison and more like a strange, fortified sanctuary. The outside world, which had been a source of constant terror, receded, replaced by the hushed, orderly routine of Dimitri's home. Leo, after an initial period of terrified silence, slowly began to emerge from his shell. He was a quiet, observant 4-year-old, with his mother's warm brown eyes. He was wary of the imposing, dark-clad men who moved silently through the halls, but he seemed to understand, with the innate wisdom of a child who has seen too much, that they were not a threat. He clung to Rachel, rarely letting her out of his sight, but he was safe. He was eating. He was even, on occasion, smiling. The news, playing on a muted television in the grand living room, was filled with the scandal. "Decorated officer missing, presumed dead," one headline read. Another detailed the internal affairs investigation into widespread corruption, linking a ring of dirty cops to the Russian mob. The Malikov family had suffered a significant, surgically precise blow to their operations, a blow from which, the news anchors speculated, they would not soon recover. Dmitry Karas was never mentioned. His name remained in the shadows, his empire untouched, his power consolidated. Rachel watched Dmitry with Leo. The massive, dangerous man was completely undone by the small child. Leo, sensing no threat, would sometimes approach Dmitry, who would stiffen, looking utterly baffled, as if confronted by a creature from another dimension. One afternoon, Leo gravely offered the mafia boss a small wooden toy truck. Dmitry stared at it for a long moment before, with awkward reverence, he accepted it, turning the small toy over in his large hands. He looked up and caught Rachel watching, a small, genuine smile playing on her lips. A faint flush rose on his neck, and he quickly looked away, but the moment was charged, a silent acknowledgement of the new domestic reality that had invaded his sterile world. He had ordered deaths, moved mountains of contraband, and faced down rivals without flinching, but he was terrified of a 4-year-old boy. The sight made Rachel's heart ache with a strange, unfamiliar fondness. That evening, after Leo was asleep in the room adjoining hers, Rachel found Dmitry on the terrace. He was staring out at the city lights, a glass of whiskey in his hand. The storm had passed, and the night was clear and cold. He did not turn as she approached, but she knew he was aware of her every step. "He is settling in," Dmitry observed, his voice a low rumble. "Yes," Rachel said, coming to stand beside him, wrapping her arms around herself. He feels safe. "I have not seen him this relaxed in over a year. You gave him back his childhood." "I gave him walls and guards," Dmitry countered, taking a sip of his whiskey. "It is not the same thing." "For him it is," Rachel said softly. They stood in silence for a long time, the glittering city spread out below them like a carpet of jewels. This was his kingdom. The thought should have terrified her, but it did not. "It is done, Rachel," Dmitry said finally, turning to face her. His expression was serious, the planes of his face shadowed in the dim light. "You are free. Mark is gone. His name is ruined. No one will ever connect you to him. You are a ghost." What does that mean?" she asked, her heart suddenly anxious. "It means I have made arrangements," he said, his voice formal, businesslike. "A new life. I have secured identities for you and your son, a house in another country. Perhaps Italy or Switzerland. Wherever you wish. It is quiet. It is safe. There is a bank account with enough money to ensure that neither you nor Leo will ever have to worry about anything again." He was offering her an escape. He was offering her the world. It was everything she had dreamed of when she was trapped with Mark: freedom, safety, a new start. But as she looked at the sterile, perfect life he was describing, her heart felt hollow. She looked at him, at this powerful, ruthless, broken man who had moved heaven and earth for her. "And you," she whispered. "What about you?" Dmitry looked away, back at the city. "This is my world," he said, his voice rough. "It is ugly. It is violent. I am not a good man, Rachel. You know what I am, what I do, you and the boy. You are light. You are innocent. You do not belong in this darkness." His words were a dismissal, but his posture, the tension in his broad shoulders, told a different story. He was pushing her away because he thought he should. "I am a monster, Rachel," he said, his voice dropping so low she could barely hear him. "But I would be your monster." Rachel felt a profound, aching clarity. He was right. He was a monster. He was a killer. He was everything she should have run from, but he was also the only man who had ever made her feel completely, wholly safe. He was the man who had looked at her broken form and seen something worth saving. He was the man who had reclaimed her son from the darkness. "When I was with Mark," she said, her voice shaking but clear, "I was terrified every single second. I was weak and he made me weaker. I looked at the world and all I saw was threats." She stepped closer to him, into his space, until she was standing directly in front of him. "I have been here for weeks in this fortress, surrounded by your guards and your shadows, knowing what you are, and I have not been afraid once." He looked down at her, his gray eyes turbulent, a storm of conflict within them. "I am done running," she said. She reached up, her hand trembling slightly, and mirrored the gesture he had given her in the library. She gently, deliberately touched the faint scar on his jaw, tracing its path from his temple. He flinched, his eyes closing for a brief second as if her touch was a brand. "I do not want your money, Dimitri. I do not want to run to Italy. I do not want to be a ghost." "Rachel," he warned, his voice a low groan. "I want this," she insisted, her gaze unwavering. "I want you." His control snapped. He cupped her face, his large hands engulfing her, his thumbs tracing her cheekbones as if memorizing her. "You do not know what you are asking," he breathed. "I know," she said. "I am stronger than I look." He stared at her for one more agonizing second, his internal battle visible on his chiseled features. Then he lowered his head and kissed her. It was not a kiss of gentle romance. It was a kiss of desperation, of possession, of starvation. It was a kiss of a man who had been in the cold for his entire life and had just for the first time felt the sun. It was brutal and tender, a claim and a surrender all at once. He poured all his darkness, his loneliness, and his terrible, violent protection into it. Rachel did not just accept it, she met it, her arms wrapping around his neck, pulling him closer, anchoring herself to him. When he finally pulled back, they were both breathing heavily. He rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed. "This is not an easy life," he murmured, his voice thick. "It is a dangerous world." "I am not afraid," Rachel whispered, her hands tangled in his hair. "Not anymore." He held her then, his arms wrapping around her waist, pulling her flush against his chest, holding her as if he would never let her go. He stood on his terrace, overlooking the city he owned. And for the first time, the cold-hearted crime lord felt truly human, his kingdom complete, the storm finally, truly over.